Hello, I'm Pastor and Professor Daniel Kim, host for today's Global Talk. The modern people in their workplaces come to face many problems. Especially the Christian workers seem to face bigger trials and issues as they struggle about their work and faith. So how should the believers work in their workplaces? Particularly in tough work situations, when your faith and spirituality are swayed, where should you find the way to solution? Today in our Global Talk, we will discuss these and other relevant issues related to faith and work. We'll begin with an introductory video clip.
평일 저녁, 많은 사람들이 이야기에 집중하고 있다.
We're all doing sacred work. 우리 모두는 성직자들입니다. We're doing the Lord's work. 왜냐 하나님의 일을 하고 있기 때문입니다.
그리스도인들이 뿌리치기엔 많은 시험과 유혹이 있는 직장 생활. 그래서 대부분의 크리스천 직장인들이 일터에서 하나님의 말씀을 지키며 생활하는 것이 너무나 힘들다고 털어놓는다. 회사의 규율을 따라야 하는 일터에서 하나님의 나라를 세우기 위해 우리 크리스천들은 어떻게 해야 될까? CGNTV 글로벌 대담에서 함께 방법을 찾아보자.
Today we'll talk about work, spirituality, and theology with our two special guests. First, I would like to introduce Professor Paul Stevens, who is here with us. He is the Professor Emeritus of Marketplace Theology at Regent College in Vancouver, Canada. And he is also the chairman of the Institute for Marketplace Transformation. Dr. Stevens, thank you so much for being here with us. We also have Pastor Taekyung Lee, and he is the pastor and missionary of Ganguk Chinese Church and the director of Christian Life Institute. Pastor Lee, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all.
I would like to address our first question to Dr. Stevens. I hear that you have visited Korea several times already. How many times has it been now?
Beyond counting. But I think it's somewhere between 8 and 10 times. I think I started almost 15 years ago to come to Korea. And I've so appreciated the warm welcome and the hospitality of people in this country.
So what is the particular purpose for this visit to Korea?
This visit, I'm actually speaking at Onori Church for a faith and work connection seminar with mainly men, actually, for the revival. And then with the Institute for Marketplace Transformation, we were actually doing a seminar from Monday to Thursday, again with people that are in the workplace to help integrate faith and work. So that's our theme, and that's why I'm here.
I heard that there's a special connection between you two. Could you maybe share with us about how you first met?
He's going to say that I was his teacher, but he's also my teacher. I have been a professor at Regent College in Vancouver for a long time, 35 years, I think it is. And he came to study and do his Master of Divinity as an oral surgeon, a dentist. And we struck up a relationship and traveled together when we did our traveling marketplace immersion. And now we work together in the Institute for Marketplace Transformation.
I see. And Pastor Lee, what's your version of your first encounter with Dr. Stevens?
Yeah. 16 years ago, I went to Vancouver to study theology. And at Regent College, I met Paul Stevens. And actually, I was in the mission field. And I worked as a dentist in a workplace, as a missionary. But during that time, the one thing continuously bothered me was how to put my faith in the workplace. But when I was in Vancouver during studying theology, and when I took Dr. Paul Stevens' courses, I really got an answer how to put our faith in a workplace.
Dr. Stevens, you have been researching and have published a number of books in the area of workplace theology. How did you come about to have this kind of passion for workplace theology and work in general?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. It comes back to my childhood and youth, actually, where my father was president of a steel fabrication company. I worked in that company in everything except being the president. And I began to see who my father really was as a worker, a Christian who really did integrate his faith with what he was doing. It was really a very special privilege to watch my dad working. And I wasn't a Christian at that time. I became a Christian at 18 years of age. But shortly after I became a Christian, I realized that Christianity is not really a religion. It's not an apparatus for getting to God and appeasing God and so on. It's actually a new way of life. It's the kingdom of God coming. And so if it's a new way of life, then work has to be part of that. And so I began to explore what that really means. Frankly, I didn't find a lot of help in doing that. I didn't find a lot of help from pastors. I'm sorry to say that. I think it's true today that a number of pastors are really doing very good, helpful work there. And I didn't find the church particularly helpful. So I had to really work on this on my own, and partly by working. So I spent 7 years midlife. I'm an old man now. But midlife, I spent 7 years working as a carpenter and then bought into this business. It was a construction business, and became a manager. So I've had, you might say, hands-on experience as well as theoretical research experience in trying to integrate faith and life.
Pastor Lee, what has been your experience in the area of marketplace?
The first subject that I studied was dentistry, so I'm a dentist. And when I was working in dental clinic, I was called by God to go to mission field. So I went to mission field as a dentist. And before going to the mission field, I thought that the missionary work was sharing gospels 24 hours, except sleeping time, 24 hours a day. But once I got there, I found that as a missionary dentist, I had to work just the same as I worked in my country. So I began to contemplate, and I began to raise a question. What was I doing here? Is it really God's work? Was I really joining God's work in the mission field? That kind of questions came to me. And after first 4 years of mission work, I decided to study, to investigate more. I really wanted to have a strong foundation of mission work in the marketplace, mission work in the workplace. So there are many schools, good schools in the world, but I picked up the Regent College because the school was founded to help those people who have the same problems.
Now let us get into a really serious topic, and that is marketplace theology. What exactly is marketplace theology? And what is involved in this so-called theology of work?
I was asked that by a Orthodox monk. He said, "What do you teach?" I said, "Marketplace theology." He said, "What's that?" Sounds like an oxymoron, two things that shouldn't be together. I said, "It's the integration of Christian faith with work in the world." He said, "It's not possible. That's why I'm a monk." Well, I went on to tell him it is possible. But it is the integration of Christian faith with work in the world. And I think it's understanding and practicing from God's perspective as revealed in Scripture and revealed through the tradition of the church as well, understanding and practicing how we are to live and work as children of God in the workplace, and to do that for God's glory and the benefit of our neighbors.
Now, if we were to contextualize this theology of work or marketplace theology, especially in the context of Korea, we here in Korea, we are very familiar with the struggles that the working people have. They have demanding bosses. They got culture that is non-Christian. And there are tons of issues and factors involved in working out there in the real world. Pastor Lee, could you perhaps identify some of these key issues that has to do with Korean workers?
In my case, the profound issues to the Christians in the marketplace is that how we understand the value of the work we are doing. So the most Christians still have low values, even though the Reformation has been almost 500 years, but the reformers' idea has not came into our real life. So we need to find the reformers' ideas. So we need to understand the values of our work, what we are doing every day. So if we do not have if we think the work we are doing is not as important as what we are sharing gospels. So if we do have such a low values of our work, then that bothers us all the time in our place. So the first thing is we need to understand how much important our work is before God. And the second one is, as you said, the Korean culture. As you know, all the Koreans has military duties. So while military services, we are under the very dictative authorities. So that culture that came into our society. So when we work in a workplace, there is some degree of military cultures in our society. So every man should be very loyal to the high authorities. So when the higher authorities demand the workers, then anyhow we need to obey. That's the part of our problems.
I've been living out here in Korea for the past 6 years. I actually migrated to the United States when I was about 10. And then when I came to visit Korea, I found this culture to be extremely difficult for Christian working men especially.
Yes.
We have this particular culture where after work, that's when their real time of fellowship with fellow workers begin, and that involves going to the bars and getting drunk and partying and sort of the licentious type of lifestyle that they are forced to live. And I've talked to many, many working men here in Korea who are Christians who are constantly struggling in their conscience because they have to abide by that or they would not be able to hold on to their jobs. So, Dr. Stevens, what did you recommend in terms of solutions, or what kind of advices can you give to working men here in Korea who are struggling with issues like this?
Yes. Well, I think the issues in Korea are very similar to issues in other countries of the world, but maybe a little more extreme on a couple of fronts. And one of the front, I think, is just what you've cited, which is the hospitality expectation. And I think it's a pretty serious issue, and I'm not sure as an outsider that I can really speak definitively and definitely about that, except to say a few things. And one is that I don't think we get polluted as persons when we take our place with our fellow workers in a context that is not particularly holy. I don't think we get polluted by being in that context. And I think it's valuable for us to be incarnational, that is, to actually be with people, especially if we want to love them and hopefully give them an opportunity to enter into the kingdom of God and become followers of Jesus. How far we actually immerse ourselves in that culture is another question. And I think we all have a line that we have to draw. But I think I'd like to emphasize that there is a struggle for every Christian in the workplace. And frankly, there's a struggle for people in Christian service careers as pastors and missionaries. They have big struggles. And I don't think there's any way of integrating faith and work without there being struggles.
Thank you. We see in the Bible all these numerous figures emerging in the Bible, thousands of human beings, their characters being illustrated in the Bible. And they all had different types of vocations.
Yeah.
When you study the Bible, when you teach the Bible, what do you see to be the definitive will of God regarding work from a biblical theological perspective?
Oh, that's a huge question, but a good one. I do think that the Bible particularly tells us that work is essentially good, that it was given to humankind before the fall or sin came into the world. It's been twisted and paralyzed and hurt and corrupted. Yes, it's been, but it's essentially good. And now that Jesus has come and done his redemptive work, I think we can see there's substantial, in this life, substantial redemption of work. So that work is a practical way of entering into God's own continuing work, and it's a practical way of actually loving our neighbors. I think the Bible teaches that very clearly, and particularly in Paul's writings in Colossians, where he tells slaves who had very compromised situations to face in the Roman Empire, he tells them that it's the Lord Christ you're working for. He's your boss. And you're to do it with sincerity and reverence. Sincerity in relationship to your master and reverence in relationship to God, which I think is fantastic, that context in Colossians.
Dr. Stevens, you and Pastor Lee, both of you have much experience in diverse areas of work. Pastor Lee, you're the director of Christian Life Institute. You're a missionary in China, and you're also a pastor, and you're also a professional dentist. And Dr. Stevens, you're a pastor, you're a carpenter, a professor, an administrator, a former dean, and I saw an entire list of your works background in your book. So when you're engaged in all of these works, these diverse works, what kind of attitude have you come to have or process in your heart, in your mind regarding work? Your personal lessons regarding work.
Well, I think that a very important attitude is that we are actually working for God, and that he is our master and our boss and the recipient even of our work. Ultimately, he's the recipient, and we're working for our neighbor. And we can enter into this as a sacred an occupation, as preaching a sermon or witnessing about Jesus. I think one of the most tragic things that has happened since the 2nd century is the dualism that certain activities are sacred and other activities are secular. And it's very extreme in Korea. But it's every country of the world that I've been to. It's there. And really to deal with that dualism, that divide between the sacred and the secular, that pastors and missionaries are doing holy work that is pleasing to God, and folks that are homemakers and people that are working in factories or businesses or politicians or artists, you know, they're doing secular work that really doesn't count to God. It doesn't really amount to very much. That is so insidious. It's so crippling for the people of God who are spending most of their waking hours in the workplace. Somewhere between 40 and 100 hours a week. In Korea, it's closer to 100, and in Germany, it's closer to 40.
Now, practically speaking, what really needs to happen in the churches in order for the common people, the working people, to really have this sense that they are servants of God in their workplaces Monday to Friday? What do the pastors need to do to equip them so that they can go out into the workplace and really have this sense of integration, have this sense of joy and fulfillment in doing the works of God?
I suggest the pastors to work together.
Work together.
Yeah, work together, not for full time, but the certain amount of time, work together. And I suggest pastors try to understand and how is the work.
Okay. So you're not just talking about team play in ministry, you're talking about actually going out into the workplace.
Yeah, actually go out
and working together.
Yeah. How about driving taxis?
Yes.
How about joining the carpenter's work for several hours a day?
Okay.
I just sorry for
I can develop that a little bit. I think that if every pastor spent half of one day each week in the workplace of one of their church members, I do this, and it's incredible what you learn. You're also a blessing to the person that you're job shadowing. I, for instance, phoned up a lawyer friend and said, I'd like to spend a whole week with you in your work. I'll be praying for you 8 hours a day, but I won't fold my hands and close my eyes. And if you have a really confidential interview that I shouldn't be present for, I'll just sit and read a book out in the lounge. He phoned up all his clients and said, I have a friend who wants to learn about law. Do you mind if they're present? And all of them said yes. And so wherever this has been done, it's been transformative because the pastors then understand the kind of issues and opportunities of what they're doing and why it is significant that their work is so good. I think a second thing that pastors can do is to teach the Bible. And I don't know how it's possible because I'm not a pastor now. And I sit in the pew and I listen to sermons. And I don't know how it's possible for pastors to preach through the whole Bible and completely miss all those passages about work. You would just wonder, how is it possible that that could happen? Because the Bible is full of it from the beginning of Genesis to the last chapter of Revelation, where we're going to work in the new heaven and new earth. And that's the second thing. The third thing is we have got to be convinced as pastors that when people work in the world, this is holy work. And it's just as pleasing to God as being a pastor or a missionary. If we really believe that, it will transform the culture of that local church. And we can actually augment that by interviewing somebody for 5 minutes every week. What do you do for a living? What are the issues you face in your daily work? What difference does your faith make to how you deal with those issues? And how can we pray for you for your ministry in the workplace? And then you pray for them. It takes 5 minutes. But it would transform the culture of that church in 1 year if you were able to do that every week for 52 weeks. Oh, maybe it isn't every week. Maybe it's every 2 weeks. But it still can be a marvelous way, I think, for churches to begin to highlight, augment, appreciate, develop, encourage the ministry of people in the workplace.
As you're sharing, I cannot help but to be reminded of how closely related the marketplace theology is to spiritual theology. Because in spiritual theology, we talk about everyday spirituality, that we need to excel in the common and mundane, everyday routines of things. How do we experience the presence of God? How do we bring God's element into these everyday situations? I'm sure you're very familiar with the concept of ordinary spirituality or everyday spirituality. Can you comment on this?
Yeah, down-to-earth spirituality is
down
another
to
way
earth
of expressing it.
spirituality,
Concerning all aspects of life, relationships, friendship, sexuality, marriage, family, work, money, the city, at all aspects of our lives really can be infiltrated with the Spirit of God, and with the love of God and love of neighbor, which I think is desperately needed in the whole area of spirituality, because spirituality has often, at least, been taught as a kind of monastic experience where you're separated from the common ventures of life, and you engage explicitly in relationship with God, disconnected from work in the world, disconnected from family life, disconnected from money and so on. And actually, I think we're healthier spiritually if we integrate our love for God and our sense of God's presence with every aspect of life.
Yes. Amen. Pastor Lee, can you comment on the relationship between work, spirituality, and everyday or down-to-earth spirituality?
I'd like to mention, first of all, I'd like to mention what is spirituality so, sorry, to raise the profound issues. Spirituality, as far as I understand, the spirituality is the way of searching God, or a way of serving God. In a marketplace, work also can be a way of serving God. So in that sense, the spirituality, Christian spirituality, came into the workplace. So in the workplace, how we serve God. If we work all the time, when we work, we think this Christian all the time, I think we can find several ways to serve God in the workplace. So let me take some couple examples. Working hard, or is a good worker. It's a one way of serving God. And hard working is also one way of serving God. And practicing our integrity in our workplace can be also one way of serving God. And creativity, and helping others, and making good communities in our workplace is also a way of serving God. I think this come together that make spirituality of working people serving God.
Yes.
I think this basic idea.
Thank you. If you could think of two characters from the Bible that you could use as like case studies regarding good role model or even negative role model of works. Yeah, let's take one example of a good role model of work ethics and just work spirituality, and a negative model that's related to work. Who would they be?
I think a positive model is, in the Older Testament, is Daniel, who found himself as a young person taken into exile. He was trained in a secular, really a pagan university, in all the literature and wisdom of the Babylonians, and then got a job in the government. But it was a very, very difficult job that he did. But you can see that in all of his contexts, as you read through the book of Daniel, you see that he directed himself to God and gave credit. In fact, when they were going to honor him for the work he did, he wanted to honor God for what, in fact, he had been able to do in terms of interpreting dreams and visions and things of that sort. So I think that's obviously a wonderful, wonderful example. And there's some in the New Testament, I think, as well. You want a negative one?
Yes, I think we need to hear at least one case of that.
Cain, maybe, who had a bad attitude and wasn't really pleasing God in his work, and ended up murdering his brother. And you have that profound question by God, where's your brother? And Cain answers, am I my brother's keeper? Am I supposed to look after my brother? And of course, Lamech, in the original family, if you want to put it that way, Lamech similarly wanted massive retaliation. If somebody hurts me 7 times, it'll be 7 times 70. I'm going to massively retaliate. And that to me is, again, a kind of negative example of somebody in the workplace. And there's some in the New Testament too.
Yes. Pastor Lee, what are your 2 examples?
I like a New Testament. But as you know, almost all the contents of the New Testament is focusing on the new community in the Jesus, after Jesus. So there are not many examples in the New Testament for working people. But I like the Paul's example, because he was a preacher and a church planter and a missionary, but he was also working, not for full-time workers, but he has very high values for work, and he self-support himself, and and I think that he has some degree of excellency in making tents and whatever he's doing. So he preaches gospel and helping people and mentoring and teaching, but he also worked by his hands.
Yes.
So I respect him. And one other thing is he did this same thing until he died.
Yeah.
Until the last moment. He was consistent. I respect him, so I like this is a good example.
Now, this is going to sound very heavy to people who are not familiar with theological terms, but what is your eschatological view or vision of work? What is it going to be like at the end time in heaven? We are going to have work, but how are we going to work? It's very difficult for us to imagine what kind of works are awaiting us in heaven.
Well, I think what you call eschatology, which is really the study of end times, or our ultimate destiny. And I'm so thrilled, really, with the Christian message that the world is not going to end with a fizzle or a bang, but the glorious second coming of Jesus and the renewal of everything. The renewal of people through resurrection, and the renewal of work, and the renewal of society, and the renewal of countries even. And in fact, you have that delightful image in the book of the Revelation of the kings of the earth bringing their glories into the holy city, which means kimchi for Korea and McDonald's from the United States and so on. Whatever is beautiful and good and so on from your culture contributing. So, and I think the text in Revelation also says believers will rule with Jesus forever and ever. That rule means you're going to work. But the work is going to be, as I said earlier, a combination of play and work and ministry and work. It's going to be such as we have hints of in this life, I think, hints of. But I think it's going to be so fulfilled in the life to come. And I think that I'm a kind of frustrated artist. Unlike you, you're not frustrated. But I think I'm going to have opportunity in the new heaven and new earth to develop some of the talents which God has given me, but are not going to find expression in this life. I think that's one of the wonderful things we can look forward to, is fulfillment of our experience of work and creativity and so on. will we need business? Two marketing professors that I know wrote an interesting article on, will there be marketing in heaven? And they say, well, yes, we're going to have people who are marketing, because there's going to be so much creativity and things, options. We'll have many options, and we need somebody to help us make those choices. And so maybe there will be marketing even in heaven. Doctors tell me, they say, oh, there's no work for me in the new heaven and new earth, because, and maybe you're even thinking this, there'll be no dental work in the new heaven and new earth. And I say, well, I don't know, but I'm sure that you're going to be a fulfilled human being in an amazing way, and the gifts and talents that God has given you are going to find amazing expression. And I think the Bible says that the leaves of the tree of life on each side of the river of life are for the healing of the nations. What needs to be healed in heaven? Or maybe heaven is continuous healing and continuous growth. And maybe your skills as a doctor are going to find some expression in the new heaven and new earth, even though there'll be no pain and no tears.
Very interesting.
But there will be at least an opportunity for you to express your gifts and talents in some way that is upbuilding to your brothers and sisters in the new heaven and new earth.
Pastor Lee, what do you envision in terms of the whole theology of work, or even work spirituality movement, building up and escalating, particularly in the context of Korean church? What do you see before the coming of the Lord in terms of work theology or marketplace theology?
It's also a big question. I think the heaven, in my sense, I think the purified state of our life here is quite similar to the heavenly life, I think. So we all acknowledge, or we all admit that we are not perfect here in this earth. But our life, when our life is 100% purified, then that state is quite similar to the heavenly life. So I do practice dentist work, but I do some work, and then, of course, I got some money. And then, but by doing that, I try to put my love and energy to love the patient by doing this practice. So this action or this work, when this work is purified 100%, then I think the motivation or the love of act can be remembered in the heaven, I think. So, this work is important, but I think the more important thing is how to work. It is the more important thing, I think, by putting love and energies. And so, in my sense, the life here is the life in a heaven, and I live in advance in this earth. So I understand this, the life in the heaven like this. So if our church, or brothers and sisters, really believes the life in the heaven, or really believe in the presence of heaven, then our work here and our action should be different.
Yes. Thank you. In the present days, in the present time context, what do you see happening in the world in terms of faith and work integration. Do you see some kind of movement happening, or do you see any wonderful examples of this kind of integration happening through organizations or denominations or ministries?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, because I think if you had asked me that question 10 years ago, because I've been doing this for 55 years, okay? But if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have said, well, there's not much happening. But I have to say now, it seems to me it's an unstoppable movement of God. It's an unstoppable movement of God in the world today. And it's not just in Korea, it's not just in North America, it's in Europe, in Africa, in South America. Unfortunately, not in Antarctica, but just about everywhere. I see a refreshment of this sense of the integration of faith and work. There's lots of organizations, there's hundreds actually in the west of the globe, hundreds of them, that are attempting to make some kind of integration. And I have to say that churches seem to be getting onto it more than I've ever seen in my lifetime. Theological schools are now saying, oh, theology is too good to be reserved for the clergy. It needs to be for everybody. And so they're beginning to branch out. They want marketplace tracks in theological schools, which I end up doing some consulting on, which I think is fantastic. And this is happening worldwide. I mean, I have far more invitations personally than I can fulfill in this whole area, because I think there's a hunger for it. And people are doing it. It's especially in Africa. And I've taught some courses for Baki Graduate University, which is a virtual university. It's a global university, but we have a number of African students who have, experienced a paradigm shift through taking a course on the theology of work. And they've been able to convince whole denominations in Africa that every pastor has to have a course on the theology of work, because their people are working most of the week, 6 days a week, many of them, if not most of them. So there's some fantastic things happening. Universities even in Africa now are having credit courses in the theology of work, again, because people are working. So I think it's, to me, I'm glad that I've lived long enough to see it, because if I had died 10 years ago, I think I would have said, I know I was doing the right thing to teach what I've been teaching and to try to model what I've been concerned about. But I think now I can see the beginning of what I think is an unstoppable movement.
Yes. I'm personally enjoying this conversation so much, and really so inspired in the process. I wish we can just go on and on. But we need to now wrap everything up. And so if you have maybe a final word for especially the Christian workers here in Korea, could you give the audience a final word, and especially to the working people? Would you start?
Let's make a difference in the workplace by studying and by worshiping God. That's my
short and sweet. Thank you. And powerful.
I think the workplace is the most strategic mission field in the world. And in addition, it's also part of God's mission. It's part of what He wants done in the world. I think the workplace is the place where people can be best formed spiritually, because we get revealed for who we are, as you said, Jia Kyung. We get revealed for who we are, and our neediness is exposed. So the workplace is incredibly important for mission, for spirituality, and I think it's incredibly important for ministry. That we're never going to reach people for Jesus and the kingdom of God simply by trying to get them to come to church. We've got to go to them, and we go to them every Monday morning. Thank God it's Monday. It should be on our tongue every Monday morning. Not thank God it's Friday, but thank God it's Monday.
Amen. Thank you.
And God goes before us.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Stevens and Pastor Lee, for sharing your precious thoughts with us today. And we hope to see you, Dr. Stevens, more often here in Korea. I hope that you can visit here as much as possible in the future. We Christians find true meaning of life only through our faith in Jesus Christ. That is why our faith should match our life and work. And our work, which comprises a large portion of our lives, should match our faith. It should not be faith and life functioning separately, but faith and life should be united and well integrated. And life should be done according to God's calling. Then I suppose each day will truly be a day of glorifying God. Once again, I would like to thank our special guests for sharing their wonderful insights with us. We thank you so much, Pastor Lee, Dr. Stevens. And I'd like to thank you, the TV audience, for watching. God bless you all.
이 프로그램은 시청자 여러분의 소중한 후원으로 제작됩니다.